All right. Hello again, everyone. So as previously mentioned, I wanted to share with you a video to orient you all to some things that I would like for you to know that you need to know in order to continue to build on your knowledge as it relates to pediatric audiology or audiology in general. Okay, so some of the topics and concepts and things we'll discuss in this brief video are things that you may be familiar with, as you may have previously discussed them in your other classes. But you know, we've been away for a couple of weeks now, so I would like to just remind everybody of some things we can have a get off to a good start. All right, so we're going to spend just a few moments, not anything crazy, a few moments just talking about topics to help us to better understand audiograms. Right. Okay, let me get rid of this floating screen. That's awful. All right. So the purpose of this brief lecture is to be able to recognize different types of audiograms. So I'm going to talk about the audiogram, and then we're going to talk about some specific characteristics of audiograms. All right. So as you all know, as hearing worsens, it takes greater levels of sound pressure to reach a person's threshold of hearing. So as we've talked about in 501, and I'm sure you've talked about in other classes, a 0 dB hearing threshold level on an audiometer is not the same as 0 dB sound pressure level on a sound level meter. So when we're talking about 0 dB HL on the audiometer, we're talking about the amount of sound pressure that's needed to achieve hearing that corresponds to 0 dB HL. All right. So hearing thresholds better or lower than 25 decibels are considered to be within normal limits. You might hear some people refer to 25 as borderline normal hearing. So for adults, hearing loss is typically characterized using these categories. Mild is 26 to 40, moderate 41 to 55 dB, moderately severe 56 to 70 dB, severe 71 to 90 dB, and profound 91 dB or more. Okay, so those are the categories for characterizing hearing loss usually among adults. Okay, so I do want to take this opportunity to share a concept with you. While we do perform pure tone audiometry from 250 to 8,000 hertz, sometimes beyond, to give us an idea of how well a person is hearing, give us an idea of the status of their hearing, the audiogram, the pure tone thresholds aren't necessarily a good representation of the ability to understand speech and noise. Think about what we're doing in the booth and what someone does in the real world when it comes to their hearing. In the booth, we do a lot of things, of course. You know, sometimes we will present spondees, we'll do some word recognition testing, speech perception threshold testing. But the bulk of our testing is kind of focused on pure tone audiometry. Play a tone, person indicates when they hear the tone, from 250 to 8,000 hertz. Now we're covering frequencies that make up the range of human speech, but we're assessing it using a pure tone. Do you go out into the world and listen to pure tones? Do you communicate using pure tones? No, not necessarily. So if you think about it like that, it kind of makes sense that a person's ability to hear a pure tone in a quiet environment might not be a good representation of their ability to hear speech, which is a complex signal, not a pure tone, in noise. So thresholds can be plotted in a graph, an audiogram, or on a table, or in a table. So here's the graphic representation that you're all used to, all right? You've got your frequencies along the x-axis, and you've got your decibel or your threshold on the y-axis, okay? You've got your x's that make up your left ear and your circles that make up your right ear. If this was color, x's would be blue and the circles would be red. We can look at an at hearing results this way, or we can look at results in a table. And I think some of you may have seen this in one of the labs that we did in 501, where it's still we have a way to designate ear, pure tone right, pure tone left. We've got frequency here. It's the title of this row. We've got a column for each frequency for each ear, so 250 through 8,000 hertz. We've got air conduction. We've got a slot for masking, bone conduction, and masking. So we can capture the same information either in a graphic representation that is the audiogram, or in a table here. Okay. So we also have different kinds of hearing loss, different characteristics of audiograms, okay? And we can make guesses about what part of a person's ear is being impacted that's causing the hearing loss. So we've got our outer, middle, and inner ear, okay? Issues that pertain to the outer and middle ear will result in a conductive hearing loss. A conductive hearing loss is one that you can reverse, okay? So if you put if your ear is occluded with wax, you have a hearing loss. But if you remove that wax, you don't have a hearing loss anymore, okay? You've removed the wax from the ear, your conductive hearing loss has been reversed, you have conductive hearing loss, no more, all right? So if you've got an issue that is taking place in the outer ear or the middle ear, it's likely it will be conductive, and it's usually reversible in most instances, or it can be resolved, rectified, all right, improved, made better, all right, compared to etiologies of the inner ear. In the inner ear, we're talking about what organ? Small, snail-shaped cochlea. Yes, we're talking about the cochlea. We're talking about the hair cells in the cochlea that do not regenerate, okay? When we've got a hearing loss that is in the inner ear, and we're talking about it's either the sensory organ or the auditory nerve, those are things that cannot be reversed or repaired. That hearing loss is permanent, and we describe it as sensory neural. Different kinds of hearing loss: conductive, which impacts the outer and the middle ear; sensory neural, which impacts the inner ear; and we also can have a mix of both. You can have a conductive hearing loss and a sensory neural hearing loss. Let me tell you how. So remember I gave you the example of having wax in your ear and then you remove the wax, and then the person's got normal hearing again. Well, maybe if they don't have a sensory neural hearing loss in addition to their conductive hearing loss. Okay, if a person has a conductive hearing loss that's caused by wax, we can remove the wax and the conductive hearing loss is gone. But if that person also has a sensory neural hearing loss, when we remove that wax, their sensory neural hearing loss will still persist. So what would happen is this person that has a temporary conductive hearing loss, but a permanent sensory neural hearing loss, will show up as having a mixed hearing loss on your audiogram. Okay, we'll get into that in just a second. But really quick, we've got different types of audiograms. So you've got a precipitously sloping audiogram. So this is an audiogram that drops off significantly as we can see here. All right, so it drops off at around 4,000 hertz and it just tanks all the way down. Okay, we refer to that as precipitously sloping. We also have a sharply sloping audiogram. It's a little bit different from the precipitously sloping one in that it falls off gradually. It doesn't take this sharp tank into the higher intensities. It does so gradually over time. All right. What else do we have? We also have the rising audiogram. You might see this in an instance, well, not this dramatic, but you might see this in an instance if you saw a child that was having some kind of middle ear conductive issue going on. It's going to impact the lower frequencies much more than it will impact the higher frequencies. So if you're in your clinic or in your rotation, you're seeing some signs, you see some tympanometry results that might indicate like a type C, you see some things that make you think, there could be some middle ear stuff going on. And then you see low frequency hearing loss. Oh yeah, they got some middle ear stuff going on. But a rising pattern is something you might see. And also what you might see in hearing conservation or people who are exposed to noise, actually, you'll see a notch. You'll likely see this notch somewhere between 3,000 and 6,000 hertz. Typically, the notch will occur at 4,000 hertz. But in this example, it's occurring at 3,000 hertz, which is okay because noise-induced hearing loss usually impacts frequencies between 3,000 and 6,000 hertz, just because of the way that those that the cochlea is shaped. So you guys know that the base is where the high frequencies are and that the apex is where the low frequencies are. So when we're talking about the traveling wave theory and this traveling wave moving through the cochlea, we're talking about loud sounds. The intensity, the amplitude of that traveling wave is huge. So as it cuts that corner, that turn in the cochlea, it causes a lot more shearing in that area where we've got hair cells that respond to 3,000 to 6,000 hertz. So it's because of the intensity, the amplitude of these loud sounds, it hits that section of the cochlea just crazy. And it's one of the reasons why it wipes out a lot of the sensory cells in that area from 3,000 to 6,000 hertz. All right. Okay. Those are some of the major characteristics that you will see. We'll talk about mostly in this class, conductive and sensory neural. There might be some instances where we might see mixed hearing loss. But we might see some patterns. We'll certainly see some rising patterns. We'll certainly see some, if we're talking about a child that's being monitored for ototoxicity, we're going to see some potentially sharply sloping patterns. Those patterns will typically take place in the higher frequencies first. And if we're talking about a child who's exposed to loud sounds or who is listening to the music too loud, we might also see some small noise notches. So I'm talking like real small. So they might have normal hearing from, I don't know, 250 to 3,000 hertz. But then when you get to 4,000 hertz, they've got just like 35, 30, right? So you need to be looking for that, because that's yeah, it's one frequency and it's only a mild kind of loss there. But that is the beginning. That is the early sign of noise-induced hearing loss. So if you're looking at an audiogram of a kid and you see a notch somewhere between 3,000 and 6,000 hertz, you better get on the horn and you better start educating that child and that family, whoever is in touch with that kid, about hearing conservation and noise-induced hearing loss. You better have your noise-induced hearing loss age-appropriate activity ready if you see that, because it might be something that you see a lot more of in the future with the extensive use of headphones and such. All right. Okay, so that's all I really wanted to talk to you all about. Okay, so let's look at the first audiogram. So what do we have here? We've got our frequencies 250 to 8,000 hertz on our x-axis, and then we've got our intensity or our decibel level on our y-axis, x-axis, y-axis. Okay, we've got a left ear, X is air conduction responses, and then we've got a left ear bone conduction responses. These are masked bone conduction responses because they are brackets, not carets. Okay, and they're bone conduction because they're opening to the left. Okay, so the bone conduction responses are better than the air conduction responses. So we're getting air conduction responses somewhere between 20 and 40 decibels. So that is showing me normal to mild hearing loss. And I have to say normal because 20 is normal. But I would say normal to mild hearing loss in the left ear. So what kind of hearing loss is this? If this person has air conduction thresholds that are in the mild hearing loss range, but bone conduction thresholds are in the normal hearing range, so 0 to, what's the worst one? 5. What do you think's going on here? What part of the ear is likely being impacted? The outer, the middle, or the inner ear? Very nice. The outer, the middle ear is being impacted. And what kind of hearing loss do we call that? Do we call it sensory neural? Do we call it conductive? Do we call it mixed? Conductive, ding, 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 way to go, way to go. Okay, so now let's look at the next one. All right, so here we're looking at a right ear. And then we're looking at unmasked air conduction responses opening up to the right. Okay, so we can see that the air conduction responses and the bone conduction responses are lining up pretty well. I also want to point out you usually only do bone conduction from 500 to 4,000 hertz. This person did 250, but that's okay. Well, we just typically don't do that. So the bone and air conduction responses are about the same. So there isn't a conductive component here, because if there were, then the bone would be better than the air. So this person seems to have normal hearing in the low frequencies, but then we start to have like a sloping hearing loss around 2,000 to 8,000 hertz. We start to get from borderline normal all the way down to, that would be profound. So what kind of hearing loss is this? When the air and the bone conduction thresholds match up, it's not normal hearing because it's not 25 decibels or lower. Sensory neural, that's it. When the air conduction and bone conduction responses are similar, then we've got a sensory neural hearing loss. Very nice. What's next? What's next? Oof. Okay, all right. So here we've got bone conduction responses for the right ear, unmasked. And then we've got air conduction unmasked thresholds for the right ear. Okay, here we have bone conduction unmasked, and it's better than our air conduction. What does that tell us? And this audiogram seems to have a conductive component as well as a sensory neural component. Okay, moving on. All right, what do we have here? We've got air conduction for the right, bone conduction unmasked for the right, and we've got responses that are normal to borderline normal. We've got normal hearing, hooray! What do we have here? We have unmasked bone conduction thresholds for the left ear, and it seems as though we have reached the limits of the audiometer, because that is what this little arrow line with the arrow means. So whenever you see this symbol attached to one of your audiometric symbols, it indicates that you're unable to get a response from your test subject at the limits of the audiometer. So the audiometer won't let you go past a certain point. So at 1,000 hertz, this audiometer didn't let the tester go past 75 dB. And the tester was not able to get a response from the patient at 75 dB, and the equipment would not let them go any higher. So at that point, we say no response. We were not able to obtain a response at the limits of the audiometer. Okay. So this audiogram shows a sensory neural hearing loss. Okay. All right, well, that's it for me. That's all I wanted to do. I just wanted to go over a couple of characteristics of audiograms with you all, and I wanted to go over some of the major types of audiograms or types of hearing loss. and how they would show up in an audiogram. All right. Well, that's it for me. No more videos from me for the day. And remember to take your syllabus quiz, and I will see you all on Thursday. Later.